Dinner should have been peaceful like every other Friday night, but tonight, as Martha poured another glass of wine, her daughter set hers down with a sharp clink. Mom Claire said, her voice gentle to the point of suspicion. Ethan and I talked about it. Starting next month, your pension and savings will be transferred directly into our joint account. That way you'll feel more at ease. No worries at all. The room fell silent. Only the clock on the wall ticked steadily, counting down the seconds of Martha's patience. She looked at her daughter, then at the man sitting beside her. The warm yellow light from the chandelier cast across Ethan's face, slick, confident, his eyes holding something that resembled pity, wrapped in fake affection. Martha said nothing, just nodded slightly as if she agreed. But inside her, a small crack had begun to form, one that would never heal again. Claire thought she was doing the right thing. She believed her mother was getting weaker, more gullible, in need of protection. She spoke about future plans, her tone steady, like she was presenting a business proposal. Ethan occasionally added comments like, "We just want you to feel secure," or "We'll handle everything." But with every word, Martha felt another piece of her dignity being stripped away. They spoke to her as if she were a child. At 62, after 30 years as a head nurse who had saved hundreds of lives, she was now being treated like a senile old woman, incapable of holding her own bank card. She forced herself to stay calm. "You think I don't know how to manage my own money?" Claire smiled, but her eyes darted toward her husband for help. "No, Mom, but you know these days there are so many scams. We just want to help." Ethan chimed in. "Exactly. Once everything's centralized, I can monitor it easily. I work in finance. I know how to optimize spending. You'll save a lot, trust me." Martha set her fork down, the sound of metal striking porcelain sharp and dry. Optimize for whom? The question dropped onto the table like a stone hitting still water. No one answered. Ethan shrugged with an awkward smile. Claire looked at her mother, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. In that moment, Martha realized her daughter was no longer the little girl who once cried in her arms when her father died. She had become someone else, distant, cold, and far more dangerous. After dinner, Claire got up to clear the dishes, while Ethan checked his emails, and Martha quietly watched them. She remembered the long nights in the hospital, the smell of antiseptic, the steady beeping of heart monitors. All those years she bent her back working overtime to raise Claire, to give her the best life possible. She had believed that sacrifice was enough to earn love and gratitude. But now, watching her daughter lower her head to wash dishes for her husband, Martha understood that blind love can create monsters. When Ethan and Claire left, the house fell silent. Martha sat in the dark, the porch light casting faint stripes across her face through the window. She sipped her cold tea, her hands trembling slightly. "Transfer all the money to them," she murmured. For the first time in her life, she heard herself give a short, broken laugh, cold and bitter. She knew that if she reacted now, they would call her paranoid or senile. No, she would let them believe she was weak. She would let them think the game was in their hands. Then she would show them who was really in control. Outside, the wind from Charleston Bay carried the salty air and the sound of waves crashing against the distant pier. Martha closed her eyes, recalling her late husband's will. Everything had been converted into an investment fund hidden under another name, a fund known only to her and the lawyer Thomas. Claire never knew her mother still received quarterly returns enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life. Martha had kept that secret for 10 years, not wanting money's power to consume her daughter. But hearing Claire's proud, superior tone tonight, she realized perhaps her daughter had already been swallowed long ago. Martha rose and walked slowly around the room, her fingers tracing the old wooden cabinet where she kept the small notebook for tracking expenses. She opened it and turned to the first page. On the margin was her husband's faded handwriting. "When everything falls apart, stay calm." She took a deep breath and smiled. Yes, stay calm. That was the only way to survive among those who pretend to care. That night, Claire sent a text. "Mom, don't forget to send me your account details. I want to get things ready early." Martha looked at the glowing screen, then turned it off. She picked up her pen and wrote in her notebook, "Day 1, they think I'll give it all away." The curtain swayed gently in the wind, and the moonlight fell across the page. In the quiet, she knew the battle had begun, but no one except her understood that the fragile woman they had seen tonight was the one preparing to teach them the greatest lesson of their lives. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the window, glinting off the floating dust in the small kitchen. Martha stood before the boiling teapot, the rising steam fogging the glass. She stirred a spoonful of sugar slowly, as if stirring the memories of her entire life. The scent of tea brought back the mornings long ago when she was young and still believed that love could fix everything. Charleston had been peaceful then, and she was full of hope. At 27, Martha lost her husband in a scaffolding collapse at the port construction site. That death didn't just take away her partner, it left her with a 2-year-old daughter and a mountain of debt. She didn't cry much, only went back to work shift after shift, day and night. Those long hours in the hospital taught her that pain could be hidden, but hands had to keep moving. Claire grew up in a cramped rented apartment on Bayview Street. Martha remembered those winter nights vividly, her daughter studying under the weak desk lamp, lips turning purple from the cold. She had promised herself to give the girl a different life, one that would never know struggle. And she kept that promise with every ounce of her strength. Every time Claire won a scholarship, Martha worked extra shifts to buy her a new dress, a decent pair of shoes, a small gift she thought her daughter deserved. She didn't realize then that her love had already turned into blind indulgence. Claire got into a prestigious university and left home. On the day she left, Martha hugged her daughter, hiding her cracked hands from endless night shifts. She told herself, in the end, it was all worth it. But when Claire graduated, her once gentle voice had turned into something cold, dry, and calculating. At 30, Claire married Ethan Clark, a man with a charming smile and a gleaming gold watch. During the lavish wedding at a luxury restaurant, Martha sat at the last table among strangers, chatting about stocks and investments. No one asked if she was happy. When the bride appeared, Ethan held Claire's hand tightly, and Martha barely caught the brief glance her daughter gave her, as if she were just an acquaintance. From that day on, the connection between mother and daughter was reduced to short phone calls, quick updates, dinner invitations, and the occasional reminder not to forget her blood pressure pills. But Martha knew those dinners weren't about love. They felt more like an obligation. She kept her gentle smile still set to the table neatly and pretended not to notice that her daughter only came to drop off takeout and a few words of criticism. "Mom, you really need to learn how to save money. Things are tough these days." This morning, as she held her teacup, Martha felt like she was looking at her past reflected in a mirror. There were no tears, only a spreading emptiness. In her mind, Claire's voice from the previous night still echoed clearly. "You don't have to worry, Mom, let me take care of it." That sentence 20 years ago might have made her happy. Now it sounded like a declaration of war. She picked up her notebook, turned to a new page, and wrote, Day 2. Begin tracking traces. The handwriting was uneven, but her hand didn't tremble. At noon, she stopped by the bank. The young teller greeted her with a polite, mechanical smile, unaware that the silver-haired woman before him had once supervised a dozen surgeries in a single night. Calmly, Martha requested a statement of her past 6 months' transactions. When she received the thick stack of papers, her heartbeat quickened. Amid hundreds of numbers, one line made her freeze a cash withdrawal of $1,500 from the Northbridge branch, 10 kilometers from her home, a place she had never been to. The banker spoke softly. "You can request to check the security footage, but you'll need to file a formal request." Martha nodded. She wasn't in a hurry. Some things were better left unrevealed too soon. That afternoon, she sat in a cafe by the river, sunlight streaming through the window, scattering glimmers across the wooden table. Outside, people walked and laughed, living their ordinary lives. Inside, Martha opened her notebook and began drawing a timeline each visit from Claire. The days Ethan borrowed her car, the strange bills. The pieces started to connect, forming a tightening net around the truth. That evening, when she returned home, she found an envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a flyer, Family Financial Consulting Services, helping you protect your parents from scams. A harmless slogan, but the handwritten note below made her blood run cold. "We're thinking of you. Claire." Martha clenched the paper, then tossed it into the fireplace. The paper burned quickly, the faint smell of smoke spreading through the quiet room. She stood watching the flames, and for the first time in years, her heart didn't tremble. She knew she had awakened something, a part of herself that had slept for years beneath endurance, a part strong and sharp, the one that had kept her alive through every surgery and every loss. She whispered to herself, "All right, Claire. If you want to manage my money, I'll show you the first rule of management, knowing exactly who you're playing with." Outside, the waves crashed steadily, and the sea breeze carried a salty scent through the window bars. In the darkness, Martha smiled, her gaze cold as steel. Day 2 had ended, and the woman they believed to be fragile was beginning to plan a silent counterattack where every tiny detail would become a blade aimed straight at the greed of those who dared to call her family. Friday night, a light rain fell. Droplets slid down the window pane, drawing thin lines against the glow of the yellow light. Martha set the table as always, pot roast, mashed potatoes, red wine, a neatly ironed white tablecloth. She wanted tonight to feel ordinary, even perfect. When Claire's car pulled up outside, Martha took a deep breath, a faint smile resting on her lips. Claire and Ethan walked in, soaked laughing as they took off their coats. They looked every bit the picture of a successful young couple. Sleek, wet hair, polished leather shoes, expensive cologne blending with the damp scent of rain. "You still keep up this Friday dinner thing?" Ethan asked, his tone laced with mild mockery. "A good habit," Martha replied softly, motioning for them to sit. Dinner began quietly, the clinking of cutlery mixing with the steady sound of rain on the porch roof. Claire smiled politely, chatting about work friends and elegant parties. Martha listened, nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She was simply waiting for the right moment. "Oh, Mom," Claire said as the meal neared its end, "I wanted to talk more about the account thing. Ethan already prepared the paperwork. You just need to sign it." She opened her purse, pulled out a cream-colored folder, and placed it gently on the table as if it were nothing unusual. Ethan poured more wine, his eyes glinting with control. Martha looked at the folder and smiled. "What kind of papers are these? I remember you said it was just temporary." Ethan leaned back, speaking slowly. "Yes, temporary, just so I can help keep track of your finances. It's really just a formality you signed, but all rights of use still belong to you." His voice dripped like honey, but his eyes were cold as steel. Martha tilted her head slightly. "Is that so? Then why does the clause say, 'full financial authorization'?" The room fell utterly silent. Ethan hesitated. Claire glanced at her mother, the flicker of confusion crossing her face and vanishing just as fast. "Mom, you're reading too carefully. That's just banking language." Martha smiled faintly, her dark eyes deep and sharp. 30 years as head nurse. I've signed thousands of documents. Do you really think I can't tell the difference between a formality and full transfer of control? Claire forced a laugh, but her lips were stiff. Mom, I'm just trying to help. Don't make this into something it's not. Ethan's voice hardened. This is for your own good. I don't want you to lose everything one day because of a scam. You should trust me. Martha set down her glass, her eyes locking on him. Trust you the way I trusted my daughter, not to reprint my property documents under another name. Or trust you the way I trusted my son-in-law, not to withdraw cash from my account using a fake card. Claire froze. Ethan shot up from his chair, the scraping sound piercing through the air. What are you talking about? Martha remained calm. I'm talking about what I know. I have the bank statements, I have the camera footage. I'm not mistaken. Ethan's face paled, then flushed red. Claire grabbed his hand, trying to steady her voice. Mom, please don't say things you can't prove. If there's a misunderstanding, we can clear it up together. No need, Martha said quietly, smiling. I've already seen enough, and there's nothing more to discuss. Dinner is over. She stood up and began clearing the dishes, slow and steady, as if that conversation had never happened. Claire sat frozen, her eyes a storm of fear and fury. Ethan clenched his fists, struggling to control himself. You can't do this, he snapped. We were only trying to do what's best for you. Martha turned her tone calm, but cutting cold. Best for me or best for your bank accounts? Ethan fell silent. Claire's voice broke. You've changed, Mom. You used to trust people. You used to believe in love. Martha's voice softened but carried an edge of iron. I used to believe love could save a person. Now I know loving the wrong people destroys you. The rain outside grew heavier, the rhythmic drops pounding like a racing heartbeat. Claire stood up, tears streaming down her face. If you can't trust me, fine. But don't blame me when you're all alone. Martha looked at her, her eyes full of both pain and resolve. Being alone is better than being betrayed. I've had enough of that. Ethan grabbed his wife's arm sharply. Let's go, Claire. Talking to someone this stubborn is pointless. The door slammed shut, leaving the house echoing with emptiness. Martha stood motionless in the living room, staring into space. She trembled not from fear, but from anger rising like fire in her veins. Then after a moment, she sat down, calmly opened her notebook, and wrote, Day 3, they've shown their true colors. The lamp cast a golden glow across the page, lighting her face no longer the gentle mother's face, but that of a woman preparing for battle. She looked around the empty house that once held laughter and warmth, now only the steady tapping of rain on the roof. Martha closed her eyes. In her mind, the plan was already taking shape, step by step, detail by detail, leaving nothing to chance. She would not scream. She would not beg. She would watch. She would record. And when the time came, she would make them understand that the woman they thought was a gullible old lady was the one holding all the power they craved. She blew out the candle on the table, leaving the room in darkness. Outside, the rain kept falling, and through a flash of lightning at the window, Martha's eyes gleamed like steel. The war had officially begun. That night, Martha barely slept. The sound of rain tapping against the roof went on endlessly steady as the heartbeat of someone waiting for a real storm to come. She lay still in bed, eyes on the ceiling, her mind chasing fragments of memory. Each image of Claire felt like a fresh wound. From the little brown-haired girl who used to run after her mother down the hospital corridors, to the young woman in a silk-white dress on her wedding day, to the daughter who tonight had looked at her mother like an enemy. She had once believed that time and love could heal everything, but now she knew there are cracks that only grow deeper the more you try to mend them. When morning light filtered through the curtains, Martha sat up. The face in the mirror was gaunt, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She brewed a cup of black coffee and sat by the window, watching the damp garden glisten after the rain. At 62, most people sought peace. But for her, peace had already been stolen along with her trust. After a light breakfast, she opened the drawer and took out stacks of bank statements, receipts, and bills. She laid them out across the table as methodically as a surgeon preparing for an operation. Her hands were steady, her gaze cold. She was no longer the offended mother. She was once again the disciplined woman who knew how to trace the source of a wound. Every small line printed on the bank paper became a clue. She marked strange transactions in red ink comparing dates and times. One cash withdrawal from the Northbridge branch, an electronic payment to a furniture store she had never heard of, an electric bill under her name but registered to Claire and Ethan's new address. A chill ran down her spine. Around noon, Martha decided to call Helen, her neighbor, of more than 10 years. Helen was a practical woman, a former accountant at a large company, direct but warm-hearted. When Martha briefly explained that Claire wanted to take over her finances, Helen went quiet for a few seconds before speaking softly. "Martha, if it were my daughter, I wouldn't let it happen either. Don't let them touch your accounts, not even once." Her voice trembled slightly as if remembering something painful. "I've been there," she continued. "My ex-husband once said he wanted to help me manage things and ended up emptying my savings. By the time I realized it, it was too late. They always start with sweet words." Her story left Martha thoughtful. Later, when Helen came over, they sat together in the living room, the tea still steaming. Helen looked at the pile of papers on the table and said quietly, "You're doing the right thing. Gather every piece of evidence. Let them feel confident. When they think you're weak, that's exactly when you're strongest." That afternoon, Martha drove to the bank. The sky was clear, a gentle breeze blowing, but her heart felt heavy as stone. The teller recognized her, greeted politely, and quickly printed detailed copies of all her accounts. As she signed the papers, Martha asked, "Can you tell me who has access to this account?" The woman checked and replied, "According to the system, only you, but if someone had your card or knew your PIN, they could have made direct withdrawals." Martha thanked her and left, clutching the folder tightly. In her mind, Ethan's face flashed before her, the cold eyes, the polite smile that never reached them. 3 months ago, when he had come instead of Claire to take her to a medical checkup, she had left her purse on the table while making tea. When she came back, he was fiddling with his phone, saying he was replying to a client. She hadn't thought much of it then. Now she understood. That evening, Martha organized all the documents neatly into a small wooden box. She labeled it Family Secrets. Then she opened her familiar notebook and wrote a new line. "Day 4 confirmed they've started stealing, but they don't know I'm awake." Outside, the moon peeked through thin clouds. She stood by the window, gazing out at the quiet street. In the darkness, she felt her anger transforming into something else, a calm, determined strength. The next morning, when she stepped onto the porch, she saw a message from Claire Mom. "I'm sorry about last night. Let's not misunderstand each other anymore. I just want you to be safe. I love you." Martha read it and calmly deleted it. She knew that apology didn't come from remorse, but from calculation. They needed her to soften so she would be easier to manipulate. She decided not to reply. Silence was the first weapon. Silence made liars uneasy. Silence gave her time. Martha brewed tea, took a deep breath, and added another note to her book Day 5, preparing to meet the lawyer. From her window, she saw Helen watering her plants next door. Helen looked up and waved. Martha smiled back, but there was something in her smile gentle, yet unyielding. She knew she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, she felt she was on the right path. The wind from the sea drifted in, carrying the salty scent of the tides. She looked into the distance, her eyes gleaming like the morning water. Somewhere out there, Claire still believed her mother was weak, still thought a few sweet words could control her. But Martha had changed. The woman they once dismissed was quietly preparing to open a battle they didn't even realize had already begun against an opponent they could never have imagined. Friday afternoon, Charleston was quiet under the soft golden light of dusk. Martha walked slowly along the cobblestone street leading to Attorney Thomas Avery's office. She wore a simple gray dress, neat and composed, just as she used to dress for the hospital every morning. But in her eyes, there was something different now. The sharp awareness of someone seeking justice, not pity. Thomas greeted her with a calm smile. His office was small, tucked on the second floor of an old building, the scent of aged wood mingling with paper and coffee. "Martha." "It's been a while," he said, motioning for her to sit. "You seem worried." "Not worried, just tired," she replied evenly. "But I need your help with something." "Of course," he said. Martha opened her bag and placed on the table a stack of statements, receipts, and photocopies from the bank. Thomas flipped through each page, his brows gradually furrowing. "I see signs of fraud," he said after a few minutes. "These withdrawals don't make sense. And this credit card account wasn't opened by you. Who else could have access to your financial information?" Martha was silent for a moment. "My daughter and her husband." Thomas looked up, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Family? Yes. But now I'm not sure that word still means the same thing." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Outside, the faint cry of seagulls echoed from afar. Thomas set the papers down and spoke slowly. "It's not uncommon, but it's always hardest when it happens within your own home." "Do you want to press charges?" Martha shook her head. "Not yet. I want you to help me protect everything first. I need to know how far they've gone and what they might do next." Thomas nodded, jotting down notes quickly. "All right. The first step is to change every password, PIN, and account detail. Second, open a new account at a different bank under your name only. Third, if needed, we can set up an asset protection trust. I can handle that for you." "Thank you," Martha said quietly, her voice roughened by exhaustion. "And one more thing. I want them to think I still don't know anything. I want them to feel safe." Thomas studied her, half surprised, half impressed. "You want to let them dig their own grave?" Martha smiled faintly. "Exactly. They think I'm weak. I'll let them believe that until they trap themselves." The meeting lasted over an hour. By the time Martha stepped outside, the sun was setting. The fading light touched her silver hair, making her appear both fragile and resolute. In her bag were freshly signed documents, small papers that would keep Claire and Ethan from touching a single cent of her money. That evening, Martha returned home, brewed a cup of tea, and sat by the window. Helen came over with a basket of cookies. "How did it go?" she asked, setting it down. "All good. I spoke with the lawyer." Helen nodded, sighing softly. "I always thought Claire was just materialistic. I didn't expect her to go this far. Are you angry?" Martha looked out at the damp wall, glowing under the streetlight. "No. Anger is easy. But I don't have time for anger anymore. I just want them to learn one thing. Never underestimate a woman who once had to fight to raise a child alone." Helen was quiet for a while, then smiled sadly. "You're brave. If it were me, I'd have fallen apart by now." "It's not bravery," Martha said in a low voice. "It's just that once you've lost all trust, you realize there's nothing left to fear." That night, Martha didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the darkness listening to the distant crash of waves. In her mind, everything was neatly organized: the new account, the signed papers, the plan ahead. She would stay silent, watch closely, gather more evidence, and when the time came, she would make them face their own greed. The next morning, Martha went early to her new bank. The young teller smiled and asked gently, "What name would you like for this account?" Martha thought for a moment, then smiled. "Aurora." The teller looked up surprised. "That's beautiful." "Does it mean something special?" Martha answered softly. "It means dawn. I think I'm going to need a new dawn." When she stepped out of the bank, the sea breeze swept through the streets, carrying the scent of salt and wet grass. Martha inhaled deeply, feeling as if she had finally shed years of dust from her soul. In the distance, the Charleston sky was pale blue sunlight shimmering over the water. She knew this was only the beginning. By late afternoon, Claire called. Her voice was gentle, almost too gentle. "Mom, you seemed upset yesterday. Ethan said I should come talk things through. I don't want any misunderstandings between us." Martha replied simply, "There's nothing to misunderstand. I'm fine." "Good. By the way, have you signed the papers yet? Ethan needs to send them to the bank soon." Martha smiled, though Claire couldn't see it. "Not yet. I'll need a few more days." Claire's tone dropped, losing its softness. "Mom, don't drag this out. Ethan doesn't like to be kept waiting." "Is that so?" Martha said slowly. "Then he should learn patience. Sometimes the things that come later are worth far more." She hung up before Claire could answer. On the table, her notebook lay open with a new line written, "Day 6, they're starting to lose patience." Good. The more desperate they get, the easier they'll slip. As night fell, Martha stepped onto the porch. The distant ocean shimmered under the moonlight like a sheet of silver. In that moment, she was no longer the gentle, underestimated mother, but a strategist waiting for the perfect time to strike. And as the wind blew through, she whispered a promise to herself. "They wanted to control me through greed. I'll make sure they destroy themselves with it." 2 days later, Claire showed up at the door again, this time without warning. The sea breeze blew through her dark brown hair, but her eyes were colder than steel. Ethan followed behind her, hands in his pockets, impatience written all over his face. Martha was watering the plants and turned when she heard the knock. "You're here early," she said calmly, setting the watering can down. "Is something wrong?" Claire didn't answer right away. She walked straight inside, glancing around the room, her gaze sweeping over every corner as if searching for evidence. "Mom, I just wanted to make sure you're all right. You didn't reply to my messages. I was worried." "I'm fine. Just busy," Martha said evenly. "Would you like some tea?" Ethan scoffed, his tone sharp with sarcasm. "Tea? I think we have more important things to discuss than that." Martha remained composed as she walked to the table, pouring hot water into a porcelain pot. "Go ahead, then. I'm listening." Claire pulled an envelope from her bag and dropped it firmly on the table. "Bank papers. Like I said before, all you need to do is sign. Ethan has already reviewed everything. It's completely safe. You don't need to worry." Martha looked at the envelope as if it were something foreign. "Is that so? You seem so concerned about me. Funny you didn't visit once when I was sick." The air in the room thickened. Ethan shifted in his seat, trying to stay calm. "This isn't about feelings. Don't be so emotional. We're trying to help you, and you're making things complicated." Martha smiled faintly, her gaze cutting through him like a blade. "Help me." His withdrawing money from someone else's account, also considered helping Ethan's face, went pale. He turned sharply to Claire. "What is she talking about?" Claire hurried to speak, her voice trembling. "Mom, you've misunderstood. I would never stop lying." Martha interrupted, her voice low but steady. "I went to the bank. I have the records, the exact date of the withdrawal, and I know who had the card that day. Silence filled the room. The wind outside picked up, making the curtains billow. Claire lowered her head, her lips trembling while Ethan gave a cold laugh, trying to regain control. "You don't have any proof. You're just being paranoid." Martha didn't respond. She poured the tea and gently placed a cup in front of him. "You know, at my age, people tend to forget things, but there are some I remember better than ever. Like the way someone looks when they're lying." Ethan started to speak, but Claire grabbed his hand. "Stop," she whispered, then turned to her mother, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom, I was only trying to help. I'm scared someone might take advantage of you now that you're getting older. And yet you were the first to do it." Martha said softly, her voice stripped of anger, leaving only quiet sorrow. "Do you know what I went through to raise you 20 years of night shifts without a single day off? I once believed that loving someone completely would protect me from being hurt by them. But I was wrong. Kindness is not a shield." Claire broke into sobs, but Martha didn't move closer. She had cried enough in her life, and now tears meant nothing. Ethan stood up, his tone clipped and controlled. "I think we should go. Call us when you're ready to sign." Martha nodded slightly. "I'll sign, but not what you brought." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" She met his gaze, her voice firm. "It means I'll sign a police report if either of you show up here again." Her words hit the room like a hammer. Ethan clenched his fists, but Claire tugged at his arm, crying softly. "Let's go, Ethan." The door slammed shut behind them. As the sound faded, Martha exhaled deeply. She sat down, looking around at the now silent room. 2 teacups still sat on the table, one untouched. She placed her hand on the rim, feeling the last trace of warmth fade against her cold skin. Helen came over after hearing the loud door slam. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Martha nodded slightly, her voice calm but heavy. "I'm fine. They've shown their true colors. Now it's just a matter of waiting." Helen sat beside her, holding her hand. "I know this hurts, but you're doing the right thing. Sometimes to save yourself, you have to accept losing the person you love." Martha said nothing. Outside, the sunset cast a crimson glow across the sea. She stared into the distance, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to think Claire was the reason I kept going, but maybe losing her is what will finally help me find myself again." Night fell, and the house was bathed in dim light. Martha opened her old notebook and wrote a new line. "Day 7, the truth has cracked open. They think I'm weak, but they don't know I'm waking up." She closed the book and sat still, listening to the faint rhythm of the waves. For the first time in years, her heart trembled, not from fear, but from resolve. Every tie that once bound her was breaking, and beneath the ashes of betrayal, a new fire was rising, quiet, steady, and strong enough to light the path toward the battle ahead. Monday morning, Charleston greeted the dawn with a thin veil of mist drifting over the bay. Martha woke early and sat by the window, holding a steaming cup of black coffee in her hands. Her mind felt sharper than it had in years. The past few days of silence hadn't weakened her. They had stripped away every illusion. Her daughter was no longer the Claire she once knew, but a woman driven by greed. Ethan was no bystander. He was the hand that had pulled Claire into the mud. They thought she was blind, but every step they took, she had already seen. Today, she would take the first step of her plan. After breakfast, she put on a beige sweater, carefully tucked a folder of documents into her bag, and drove to the office of attorney Thomas Avery. When she walked in, he was already standing to greet her. "I've prepared everything," he said. "If you're ready, we can begin securing your assets and filing the report." Martha sat down, a faint smile crossing her face. "It's not time to file anything yet." but I want everything locked down. I don't want them touching a single cent of mine." Thomas nodded, spreading a set of papers before her. "I've created a temporary trust. You'll be the only one with access. You can gradually transfer the money from your old accounts into it. I've also opened a new account at a different bank under a confidential name. No one will know it exists." Martha read each page carefully, her expression unreadable. When she signed, her hand did not tremble even once. Thomas studied her, half surprised, half admiring. "You know, I've met many people in similar situations, but very few stay this calm." Martha replied softly, "I spent my life in hospitals. When others panicked, I had to keep my heartbeat steady. This is no different, except this time, the patient I'm saving is my own life." He smiled. "I believe you'll be fine, but there's something else I'd like you to consider. If you ever feel unsafe, I can help you apply for a restraining order just in case." Martha was silent for a few seconds before shaking her head. "Not yet. I want them to come. The more they come, the more I'll see who they really are." On the drive home, she took the long route under the canopy of oak trees. The ancient branches stood tall and still, like sentinels bearing silent witness to a woman preparing for her own private war. She stopped at an old flower shop and bought a bundle of dried lavender. Its faint fragrance reminded her of the years after her husband's death, when that same scent had helped her sleep through lonely nights. Now lavender was no longer comfort. It was a reminder that pain, when controlled, could become strength. When she returned home, Helen was waiting on the porch. Out so early, her neighbor asked, "Met with the lawyer?" "Everything's ready," Martha replied. Helen looked into her friend's eyes and saw the quiet resolve there. "Are you sure you want to take this that far?" Martha's voice was calm. "I'm not the one taking it there." "They are. I'm just following the path they chose." That afternoon, as the light softened, Martha organized her desk, arranging documents by category. She labeled each folder banking credit cards, utilities correspondence. She worked as though preparing for a delicate surgery, every detail precise, every move documented. By evening, when the house was quiet, the phone rang. It was Claire. "Mom, I heard you met with a lawyer. What's going on?" "Oh, I just asked a few questions about finances. Old people need to plan ahead," Martha replied evenly. Claire's voice faltered. "Mom, you don't actually think I'd hurt you, do you? I never meant to." "If you truly don't mean to hurt me," Martha interrupted softly, "then you have nothing to worry about, do you?" The line went silent. After a few seconds, Claire said quietly, "I'm afraid someone's putting ideas in your head." "No, Claire," Martha said, her voice low and deliberate. "For the first time in my life, I'm listening to myself." When the call ended, she sat in stillness for a long while. Outside, moonlight shimmered over the sea and reflected against the window pane. Martha opened her notebook and wrote, "Day 8 defenses established. They're afraid, but they still don't know why." That night, she didn't fall asleep right away. In the darkness, the ticking clock merged with the rhythm of her steady breathing. Everything was in place. All she had to do now was wait for the right moment. And in that quiet, Martha smiled faintly. People often say, power makes someone strong, but to her true strength was knowing when to stay silent and when to strike. Tuesday morning, the Charleston sky was gray and heavy, the wind carrying the salty scent of the sea through the old oak trees. Martha opened her eyes as the clock struck 6. She felt lighter, as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally begun to lift. Today, she was no longer the humiliated mother. She was the one in control. She got up, tied her hair back, put on her robe, and went downstairs. On the kitchen table, Thomas's folder was still neatly arranged. On top was a small note that read, "Everything will be protected." Martha tucked it into her coat pocket and headed out. The road to her new bank was still damp with morning dew. When she walked in, the staff recognized her and greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Aurora," one of them said. Martha nodded gently, feeling the name Aurora meaning dawn take on a new meaning. It was no longer just a name. It was a declaration that the darkness had passed. She submitted her documents and completed the transfer. All of her savings, over $200,000, were withdrawn from her old account and split evenly into 2 secure trust funds, both under her sole control. There was no trace left for Claire and Ethan to find. As she stepped out of the bank, Martha paused before the glass door and looked at her reflection. The face that stared back was no longer that of a gentle mother, but of a woman who had reclaimed her strength. Around noon, she stopped by the electric company. The small office was lit with pale fluorescent light. The clerk reviewed the records, then looked up with mild confusion. "You're right," she said. "The electric account for a house in Riverbend is under your name. I can cancel it immediately if you confirm." Martha handed over her papers, her voice steady. "Cancel it today and send a copy of the violation file to Attorney Thomas Avery." The young woman nodded. "I'll take care of it right away. This is identity fraud, ma'am. You might want to file a police report." "Not yet," Martha said calmly. "I want them to confess with their own mouths." Leaving the office, she stopped by Helen's house. Her old friend was knitting on the porch. Seeing Martha, she looked up and asked, "Everything all right?" "Better than all right," Martha replied, setting a bundle of lavender on the table. "I erased every trace today. Now no one but me can touch that money." Helen squinted slightly, her tone mixed with admiration. "You seem like a different person." "What's next?" Martha smiled faintly. "I'll wait for them to reveal themselves. I don't need to attack. If I stand still long enough, they'll trip over their own lies." Later that afternoon, when she returned home, Martha turned on her computer and checked the new account. The money was secure. She exhaled deeply, then opened her email. A new message from Thomas appeared. "All transactions are complete. I recommend you stay quiet for a while. If your daughter makes any new moves, contact me immediately." Martha replied simply, "Understood. Thank you." That evening, the wind blew harder than usual. She sat on the porch, the warm light from inside casting a glow over her calm face. Taking her small notebook, she wrote, "Day 9, all transfers complete. They still think I'm a fool. Good." Just then, her phone rang. The name on the screen, Claire. Martha hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mom, I just wanted to check if you're okay. The neighbors said you've been meeting with a lawyer." "Yes." Martha replied, softly but firmly. "I needed to take care of some things for the future. I just don't want you to be influenced by anyone." Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know you're upset, but doing this will only make things worse." "You're wrong," Martha interrupted. "Things have never been clearer." There was silence on the other end. Then Claire spoke quietly. "Ethan said if you keep resisting, he won't take responsibility for what happens. I don't want anything bad to happen, Mom." Martha closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Don't threaten me, Claire. You're talking to someone who has watched hundreds die and hundreds survive. Do you really think a few threats from your husband will scare me?" Claire fell silent, her breathing sharp through the line. "You've really changed, Mom," she whispered. "No, Claire," Martha said calmly. "I've just finally come back." When the call ended, she set the phone down and looked out at the sky, now painted in deep shades of purple. The sound of distant waves blended with the whisper of the wind through the trees, like a quiet prelude to the next chapter. Helen knocked on the door carrying a bowl of hot soup. I heard the phone. "Everything okay?" "Nothing serious," Martha replied, accepting the bowl. Just the sound of people who've lost control trying to pretend they still have it. Helen smiled knowingly and sat beside her. I'm guessing they still don't realize that the prey they thought was weak is the one holding the noose." Martha said nothing, her gaze fixed on the ocean. On the surface of the water, the moon had begun to rise, its reflection stretching into a silver path. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Day 9 is over, and I think the real dawn is near." She closed her notebook and took a sip of tea. In the quiet house, only the sound of the ticking clock remained steady, strong like the heartbeat of a woman who no longer knew fear. 3 days later, heavy rain poured over Charleston in the late afternoon. The sound of it drummed against the roof, making Martha's small house tremble softly. She sat at the wooden table watching the streams of water run down the window pane. That quiet calm was about to be broken, she knew it. Claire's silence had always been the warning of an approaching storm. Just as she expected, at 7 o'clock sharp, the sound of a car stopped at the gate. The door opened, and this time Claire came alone. She stepped inside, soaked from head to toe, her face pale with exhaustion, though her eyes were still as cold as ever. Martha stood up and said quietly, "You came without calling." "I needed to talk," Claire replied in a low voice, just once to make things clear. They sat across from each other in the small kitchen, the dim yellow light flickering between them. The rain outside beat against the porch like a distant drum, setting the rhythm for a conversation that had been waiting far too long. Mom Claire began, "I don't understand why you're doing this. I only wanted to help. Why do you think I'd ever want to hurt you? Because I don't need help that comes in that form," Martha said softly. "You didn't want to help. You wanted control." Claire frowned. "I wasn't trying to control you. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. You don't know how many scams there are these days." Martha gave a faint, bitter smile. "You're right. There are plenty of scammers out there, but some of them happen to share my last name." Claire's hands clenched, her voice trembling. "What proof do you even have? Ethan said someone's been putting ideas in your head. You've changed, Mom. You're being paranoid." Martha stood, slowly walked to the bookshelf, and opened a drawer. She pulled out a thick folder and laid it on the table. "These are bank statements, bills, credit card agreements, all under my name, but the addresses and transactions belong to you and your husband. I don't need anyone to influence me. Numbers don't lie." Claire's eyes widened, her lips shaking. You've been spying on me." "No." Martha answered. "I just finally opened my eyes." The air in the room grew heavy. Claire bowed her head, silent tears falling onto her lap. "Mom, I didn't know Ethan was doing that. He told me it was temporary, just using your name to make a loan easier. I swear I didn't know he was taking the money." Martha looked at her, her voice rough but steady. "You didn't know, or you didn't want to know." The question hung in the air like a blade. The rain outside grew harsher thunder, rolling until the windows rattled. Martha remained still, her gaze cold, but filled with a deep sorrow. "I used to believe that if you loved someone enough, they wouldn't betray you. But I must have raised you wrong. I taught you how to give, but I forgot to teach you that greed devours everything." Claire lifted her head, her eyes red and wet. "What will you do now, nothing?" Martha said quietly. "Everything's in the lawyer's hands. If Ethan continues, I'll let the court handle it." Her daughter shot up from her chair, voice breaking. "You're going to destroy me, aren't you?" Martha replied, each word deliberate. "No, Claire. You've done that to yourself." Claire stared at her mother for a long moment before turning away. When the door closed behind her, the sound of the rain roared like an explosion across the roof. Martha stood still, watching her leave, her heart heavy. A mother's love doesn't die in a day. It fades like a candle burning in the wind, fragile yet bright, until the very end. She sat down and opened her notebook. Writing day 12, the confrontation ended. She cried, but those tears weren't of remorse. They were of fear. Outside, the rain began to ease, leaving the streets glistening under the lamplight. Martha closed the notebook and shut her eyes. Inside, her pain and strength intertwined like the two sides of a scar. And deep within that calm, a new plan was forming, not only to protect herself, but to reclaim everything she rightfully deserved. The next morning, Charleston's sky was crystal clear after a night of rain. The bay shimmered like it had been dusted with silver, and the ripples reflected the first light of day. Martha sat on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. The smell of it mingled with the salt of the sea, soft and bitter, like everything that still lingered in her heart. She hadn't slept since Claire left the night before. Her daughter's words echoed in her mind. "You're going to destroy me, aren't you?" Martha had wanted to believe that there was still a trace of remorse in her child, but she reminded herself that true repentance never comes with tears meant to earn forgiveness. It comes in silence through action, and Claire had done neither. Around 9 o'clock, the phone rang. Thomas Avery's name flashed on the screen. "Martha." His voice came through steady and clear. "You need to come to my office right away. I just received new information about your financial situation. What's wrong?" "Someone tried to log into your old account this morning, 3 times in a row. The system blocked them, but clearly they're not done yet." Martha paused for a few seconds. I suppose we don't need to ask who she said, quietly, her tone calm and cold. "Do you want me to alert the bank or the police?" Thomas asked. "Not yet. Let them think nothing has been discovered." "Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely." "Let them dig the hole a little deeper." Martha ended the call and looked out toward the horizon. The sea glittered bright under the sun, but her heart darkened. Claire and Ethan were desperate, and when desperate people are cornered, they always reveal themselves. That afternoon, Helen stopped by with a tray of freshly baked apple pie. "You look tense," she said, setting it on the table. "Maybe because I can see the end coming," Martha replied. "The end for who?" Helen asked softly. Martha smiled faintly. "The end of the illusion that I could still save my daughter." Helen sat beside her. "You know, I used to think forgiveness was the noblest thing a person could offer. But some people, the more you forgive them, the more they believe they have the right to hurt you again." Martha nodded, her eyes distant. "You're right. Claire will have to learn that lesson, and this time I'll be the one to teach it." Late in the afternoon, Martha received a message from Claire Mom. "I want to see you one more time, without Ethan, just the two of us." Below was the address of a small cafe by the river, the same one they used to visit when Claire was a child. Martha stared at the message, her chest tightening. She knew it could be a trap, or perhaps the final moment of a bond about to break. But either way, she would go. Not because she still believed, but because she needed to face the truth one last time. When she arrived, the cafe was quiet, filled only with the low hum of jazz and the scent of freshly ground coffee. Claire sat in a corner wearing an old sweater, her face pale and drawn dark circles under her eyes. When she saw her mother, she stood and said softly, "Thank you for coming." Martha took a seat without speaking. The waiter brought 2 cups of coffee steam, rising between them like a fragile barrier. Mom Claire began, "I know I was wrong. Ethan took advantage of you, and I was stupid to let it happen. But you can't take him to court. That would ruin my life." "And what about mine?" Martha asked. "Do you think it hasn't been ruined enough?" Claire's lips trembled, her voice shrinking. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to stop. Don't take this to court. He's lost his job. He's drowning in debt. If you still love me, love you." Martha cut in her tone, slow and piercing. "Love cannot be an excuse for deceit. You want my love while you're the one who handed over the keys to my life." Tears streamed down Claire's cheeks. Mom, I just want things to go back to the way they were. Never. Martha said firmly, her voice solid as stone. You can't go back to being the daughter you once were, just as I can't go back to being the woman who believed sacrifice could save everyone. They sat in silence, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the window. Finally, Martha stood. You have one chance left. Tell the truth to my lawyer before I file the report. If you do, I'll reconsider. If not, be ready to face the consequences. Claire nodded, her face pale as paper. Martha left the cafe, stepping into the thin drizzle outside. The cool air stung her skin, but her heartbeat was calm, steady, not from fear, but from the strange strength that comes when a person stops seeking approval from others. When she returned home, she opened her notebook and wrote, Day 13. The girl trembled. But greed never learns restraint, and weakness always returns disguised as a plea. Outside, the waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, unwavering. Martha gazed out at the sea, her eyes cold as steel. She knew the final act was near, and this time she would be the one delivering the verdict. 3 days after the meeting at the cafe, Martha received a call from Thomas Avery. His voice was clear but heavy. Martha, I need to inform you. Claire and her husband have just hired a lawyer. They're claiming that you fabricated everything to harm your own daughter and that you're showing signs of mental instability. Martha went silent. For a brief second, her heart stopped. Then she let out a quiet, bitter laugh. I suppose they've run out of excuses. Thomas sighed. I've seen this before. When people realize they can't win with reason, they attack your image instead. But don't worry. We have strong evidence. I just need you to be ready. Ready, Martha repeated softly. I've been ready since the day they underestimated me. That afternoon, Charleston was wrapped in fog. Martha sat by the window, staring out at the still water of the bay. Seagulls circled, once then vanished into the gray sky. Inside her, every trace of anger and hurt had already burned away. What remained was cold determination. Helen came by with news. I heard some people in the neighborhood saying Claire's been telling everyone you're confused, that you can't remember things. They're trying to make you look senile. Martha nodded calmly. Good. Let them talk. The more they talk, the easier it'll be to prove the truth. Helen frowned. But if they keep spreading lies, it could damage your reputation. Martha looked her straight in the eye. My reputation doesn't live in their mouths. It lives in my actions. That night, she reorganized every document, bank statements, receipts, recordings of recent calls, all sorted carefully into folders. The warm desk light reflected off her face, calm yet firm as stone. As she closed the final file, Martha whispered, If they want a war, I'll give them one. A legal war where I don't have to shout, only let the evidence speak. The next morning, Thomas called again. I filed the preliminary report. The bank confirmed unauthorized transactions and identity fraud. The police have opened an investigation. So it's done, Martha said softly, her voice light as air. Not entirely, Thomas replied. There's one more thing. Claire can still contact you. Do you want me to file for a restraining order? Martha hesitated for a moment, then spoke quietly. No, I want to look her in the eyes one last time when she realizes the game is over. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire arrived. No expensive dress, no fake smile, just the hollow stare of someone who had lost everything. She stood at the porch, fine mist falling on her hair. Mom, she whispered, I didn't think you'd really go through with it. Martha looked at her daughter, her tone calm but cutting like ice. You didn't think I would because you never believed I could stand up. And that's exactly why you lost. Claire broke down, falling to her knees. "Mom, please withdraw the case. I've lost everything." Martha stood in silence for a long moment, then spoke slowly. "I didn't do this to make you lose everything. I did it so you'd learn what boundaries mean, and so I could finally find myself again." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving her daughter's cries fading into the rain. The door closed softly but firmly behind her, like the final period at the end of a long chapter. The next morning, news spread throughout the neighborhood. People whispered about the lawsuit between Martha Ellison and her own daughter. At first, some neighbors couldn't believe it, but soon everyone fell silent when the local newspaper published the headline, "Elderly Woman Submits Evidence of Daughter and Son in Law's Identity, Fraud, and Illegal Withdrawals." Helen brought the newspaper over and placed it on the table. "I knew you were strong, but I never thought you'd go this far," she said, her eyes filled with both admiration and concern. Martha simply nodded, her gaze calm. "It's not that I wanted to go this far. They're the ones who pushed me here." That morning, Martha's house became the center of curiosity. A few reporters called some strangers, knocked on her door with questions. She didn't answer any of them. Instead, she sent a message through her lawyer, Thomas. "I don't want publicity. I only want justice." That afternoon, Thomas called with an update. "Martha, I just received confirmation. The bank officially verified all the evidence. The court will set a trial date soon. But there's something else Claire confessed this morning during questioning." Martha froze, her fingers tightening around the phone. What did she say? She blamed her husband. Thomas replied, said Ethan was the mastermind and that she only followed his instructions. "Did she cry?" Martha asked. "A lot," he said, but not out of remorse, out of fear. Martha closed her eyes. The pain rose again, only to fade as quickly as the receding tide. She knew now that Claire's tears couldn't fix anything. She had spent a lifetime crying in her daughter's place, and now she had none left to waste. That evening, when Helen came over, Martha was sitting at her desk, the case files spread out before her. The warm light reflected on her face, weary yet clear, as though every bit of fog in her life had finally lifted. Thomas said Claire confessed, she said softly. Helen sat beside her, taking her hand. "Do you feel any lighter?" "No," Martha answered, her voice calm as the wind. "Justice isn't joy, it's balance. When the scale has been uneven for too long, you have to pull it back, even if it hurts both sides." Outside, a light rain began to fall again. Martha looked through the window and saw headlights glimmering down the hill, a figure standing in the drizzle. She recognized her instantly, Claire. Helen grew anxious. "Are you going out there?" "Yes, I need to end this." Martha put on her raincoat and stepped outside. Claire stood there, drenched and trembling. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "I've lost everything. Ethan left me. Everyone hates me. The papers call me a criminal. I have nothing left." Martha looked at her daughter, her eyes no longer angry, only sad. "Now you finally understand what it means to lose. What I lost, you can never give back." "I know," Claire sobbed. "Please give me one more chance. I'll do anything for you to forgive me." Martha stepped closer, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Forgiveness isn't something you beg for, Claire. It's something I have to find within myself, and I haven't found it yet." Claire lowered her head, her tears blending with the rain. Martha stepped back and spoke softly. "Go. Find your own life again. I have no room left for late apologies." Then she turned and walked back inside. As the door closed behind her, the rain eased. In that quiet stillness, Martha felt as though the final piece of her past had been laid to rest peacefully without resentment. She returned to her desk, opened her notebook, and wrote, "Day 15, she said she was sorry, but apologies can't change the truth. I no longer want revenge. I just want peace." The light reflected off the words, her handwriting shaky but firm. Outside, the wind carried in the clean scent of sea salt, cold yet pure. For the first time in many years, Martha felt truly at peace. One chapter had closed, and though she didn't yet know what the next would bring, she knew she had overcome her greatest fear, not of losing family, but of losing herself. 2 weeks later, the sky over Charleston was an uncanny shade of blue. The storm of public attention had passed, the reporters had stopped calling, and the neighbors had moved on from gossip. Yet inside Martha there remained a strange emptiness, peaceful but lonely. In the first few days, without phone calls or knocks at the door, she thought she would feel relieved. Instead, every morning the house echoed with a thick, heavy silence, as if waiting for a familiar voice that would never return. That morning, Thomas Avery called. "Martha, I have news. The court has finalized everything. Ethan has been officially charged with financial fraud, and Claire was granted leniency for cooperating. She won't serve jail time but must repay the money and complete 2 years of community service." Martha listened and replied softly, "Good. Justice has done its part." Thomas paused for a moment, then asked, "Are you all right? I know that sometimes winning doesn't feel like victory." "I'm all right," she said quietly. "Sometimes silence is the final form of justice." After the call, Martha went out to the porch and sat facing the bay. The sunlight shimmered across the surface, scattering diamonds of light over the rippling water. She thought of Claire, the little girl who used to cling to her hand on windy afternoons, who used to hide from thunder, who used to giggle as Martha taught her how to mix cake batter. Those memories were still there, but they now belonged to another world, a world untouched by lies. That afternoon, Helen came by with a basket of freshly cut lavender. "I heard the trial's over," she said. "You can rest easy now." Martha accepted the basket, the scent filling the room. Rest easy, maybe, but not lighthearted. "I'm still not sure if I've truly forgiven her." Helen smiled sadly. "Maybe forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means accepting that the wound is there but refusing to let it keep bleeding." Martha sat quietly for a long while before speaking softly. "Maybe you're right. I don't want to hate her. Hate only makes you age faster." Helen squeezed her hand gently. "You did something few people could. Not everyone has the strength to face their own child. Now it's time to live for yourself, Martha." That evening, Martha opened her familiar notebook. The new page was blank, waiting for her words. She wrote slowly and carefully when 28. "The case is over. I didn't win, nor did I lose. I simply reclaimed what was always mine, respect. Not theirs, but my own." Then she set her pen down and closed the book softly. Outside, a full moon shone brightly, casting silver light across the rooftop in the bay. The night wind drifted through the window, carrying the gentle scent of lavender. Martha leaned back in her chair, eyes slowly closing. In her steady breath, she realized that peace doesn't come after revenge. It comes when you no longer need to prove you were right. And perhaps tonight, after years of wrestling between love and resentment, she had finally learned how to let go without losing herself. The following spring, Charleston bloomed beneath the soft scent of the ocean and the pale blue sky. Along the Bay Road, cherry blossoms were in full bloom, their petals drifting down like pink mist. Martha stood on the porch of her new home in the suburbs, nearly 40 minutes from the city center. It was a modest 2-story wooden house with a gray tiled roof, a backyard garden, and a white picket fence. Simple but full of sunlight, peaceful enough that she could hear the waves in the distance whenever she opened a window. After the lawsuit, Martha had used the restitution money from Claire and Ethan, along with what she had left in savings, to buy this home. She wanted to leave behind the old neighborhood, the one filled with whispers and pitying looks, and begin a new chapter, one that truly belonged to her. Every morning she brewed a cup of lavender tea, opened the windows to let the light pour in, and wrote a few lines in her old notebook. The pages were no longer titled Day, as they once were. Now they simply held reflections of peace, of freedom. That morning, Helen came to visit. She was just the same as always, wearing her brown knit coat, holding a basket of cookies, her smile warm and familiar. "This place is beautiful," Helen said, admiring the row of lavender along the fence. "You finally found your own corner of the world." "Yes," Martha smiled. "I used to think happiness was having someone beside you. Now I realize sometimes happiness is just having a place where you can breathe quietly." Helen set the basket on the table, her tone gentle. "Has Claire reached out to you?" Martha shook her head lightly. "No. She moved out of Charleston last month. Thomas said she's working for a charity organization in Atlanta. Maybe that's a good thing for her." The two women sat in silence for a moment. Helen looked toward the sea and said softly, "I think one day you'll be able to forgive her." Martha's voice was calm. "Maybe. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting anymore. It just means accepting that it's over. I don't want to look back." That afternoon, Martha took a walk along the beach, her notebook in hand. The waves rolled onto the shore, white foam spreading across the sand, fading and returning again. Each footprint she left was washed away by the water, as if time itself was erasing the past. She sat on a wooden bench near the water's edge and wrote, "March, the sky is calm, and so is my heart. I once thought I couldn't live after losing my daughter, but now I live not because I've forgotten, but because I've accepted that her path no longer runs alongside mine." When she looked up, she saw a young couple walking along the beach with their little girl. The child wore a white dress, holding a butterfly-shaped kite, laughing as the wind lifted it higher. Martha's chest tightened slightly. For a moment, she saw Claire at 5 years old running along the sand, holding her mother's hand, hair flying in the wind, laughter echoing against the sea. The memory no longer hurt. It carried only a tender ache, like a song fading into the distance. As the sun dipped beyond the horizon, Martha returned home. In her small kitchen, the scent of lavender tea lingered in the air. She turned on the lamp, the soft golden light illuminating a photo on the wall, a picture of her and Claire at her college graduation. In it, Claire was radiant, full of youth, and Martha stood beside her, eyes proud. She reached out, touched the frame, and whispered, "You chose your path, and I've chosen mine." That night, Helen called. You know, her warm voice said there's a new volunteer program teaching older women how to manage their finances and avoid fraud. They're looking for mentors. I think you should join. Martha chuckled. I used to be the one fooled, and now I'll be the one teaching others how not to be fooled. Sounds ironic, doesn't it? No, Helen replied. It sounds perfect. Who better to teach than someone who's lived through it? Martha was quiet for a moment before saying softly, All right, I'll do it. Maybe this is how I turn pain into something useful. That night, the ocean wind blew strong, carrying the salt air through the window. Martha opened her notebook again and wrote March 20th. I've learned that some wounds don't need to be bandaged, only time. I'll teach other women that they have the right to keep what's theirs, that no one, not even their children, has the right to decide for them. When she put down her pen, she heard the laughter of children drifting from a nearby house, bright, full of life like a melody of spring. Martha smiled. In the gentle stillness of the seaside night, the woman who had once lost everything had now found what mattered most, the freedom of her own spirit and the courage to begin again at any age. It was a bright and clear Sunday morning in Charleston, the sky glowing after a gentle night rain. Martha woke earlier than usual, listening to the sound of distant waves mingling with the cries of seagulls. She lay still for a moment, feeling the salty breeze drift through the open window. The sensation was different from all the mornings before. No heaviness, no fear, only a strange and quiet peace filling each breath. She brewed a cup of lavender tea and stepped out onto the porch. The first light of day shimmered across her silver hair, turning it into strands of light beneath the blue sky. The small garden in front of her house was covered in the soft purple of lavender blooms. She had planted them herself with the same hands that once trembled as they held legal papers, now trembling only from emotion. Today was special, the opening day of Aurora Women, the community finance program Helen had encouraged her to join as a mentor. Martha prepared neatly a small handbag, the old notebook that had followed her through the hardest years, and a few handwritten notes. She wasn't there to teach, only to share that weakness is not a destiny, it's the beginning of strength. The community center was filled with sunlight. More than 20 women of different ages filled the rows of chairs, their eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and hesitation. When Martha stepped up to the podium, the chatter faded into silence. She looked around and smiled gently. "I'm not an expert," she began, her voice calm and warm. "I'm just someone who once lost everything, money, trust, and nearly myself. But because of that, I learned the most important truth. When people think you are weak, that's exactly when you have the power to change your life." A young woman asked, "And how did you do that?" "I started by stopping my fear," Martha replied. "I stopped waiting for permission to be free. When you know your worth, no one can use love or obligation to chain you again." The room grew still. Some women took notes while others looked up, eyes glistening. Martha continued her story from the shock and betrayal through the lawsuit to the final victory. But she didn't dwell on revenge. She spoke about courage, about learning how to stand steady in the middle of one's own storm. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. An elderly woman approached her, eyes filled with tears, and took her hand. "Thank you," she said. "Your story made me realize I'm not alone." Martha smiled gently, squeezing her hand. "We've all thought we were alone, but really we were just waiting for someone brave enough to speak first." That afternoon, Martha returned to her small house by the bay. The golden light of sunset filled the room. On the table still lay the old photo of her and Claire from her graduation day. She looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "I hope you find peace, too. My daughter, just as I have today." She opened her notebook and wrote the final lines. "Today I no longer count the days just to survive, but to be grateful. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it lightens the heart. I have found myself again not the gentle mother I once was, but the woman strong enough to smile while standing alone." As she closed the notebook, the sea breeze swept in, carrying the scent of salt and flowers. Martha looked up at the sky and said softly, "If someone out there is listening to this story, remember, don't be afraid to begin again. Share your story, tell it, because perhaps your story will be the sunrise for someone still lost in the dark." Her voice blended with the sound of the waves, gentle yet steady like the final full stop of a long journey toward freedom and dignity.